We know some of Mary Coddington Trent's story, as she will tell you here, but some important facts are not known with certainty. For example, records are not definitive about the year she was born. According to some sources, it was 1692, while others suggest 1694, and perhaps even as early as 1689. For the purpose of this portrayal, we assume 1692. We also know little about her birth father, Thomas Coddington, or about her life after her husband's death in 1724. The scene is Madame Trent's bedroom in the house William Trent built at the Falls of the Delaware in 1719. It is 1726. The probate inventory conducted after William Trent died on Christmas Day 2 years previously has recently been completed. In the absence of a will, James, Trent's oldest son from his first marriage, is heir to the estate. All inhabitants of the Trent home in New Jersey, Mary, her young son William, and Yaffe, Joan, Bob, Dick, Nanny, Tom, Bosun, Julius, Harry, Pedro, and Cupid, the enslaved people that Trent owned, now face uncertainty as to their future.
Welcome to my home. My name is Mary Coddington Trent. It has been 2 years since my husband, Judge William Trent, died from a fit of apoplexy on Christmas Day in 1724. I say that this is my home, but unless I prevail in my suit for my dower rights, I cannot hope to live here as I did with Judge Trent. Some of you might have influence in these matters, so with your permission, I shall make my plea to you. With my family connections, as well as my dowry I brought to our marriage, resources that my husband was able to use to improve not only the value of this property, but of his business investments as well. But I am already ahead of my story. My family began building our wealth and reputation 2 generations before me. By the time of my birth in 1692, my family was already prominent here in the New World. My grandfather, William Coddington, was a magistrate for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He was also so successful as one of the leading merchants in Boston that he was able to build the first brick house there, which pleased my grandmother very much indeed. Grandfather served as the Massachusetts Bay Colony's treasurer from 1634 to 1636, in addition to being elected magistrate every year until 1637, when he became a deputy for Boston. That very same year, however, he risked all his material success by taking a stand for what he believed. He publicly supported the controversial religious tenets of Anne Hutchinson, which put him in conflict with the Massachusetts establishment. The situation deteriorated until Hutchinson and her followers were banished from the Massachusetts colony. My grandfather followed her, and within 3 years became the first governor of the new colony that he had helped to found, Rhode Island, and held that office until his death in 1678. My grandfather continued to show courage by being among the earliest colonial members of the Religious Society of Friends, that you may know as the Quakers. I very much hope that I have inherited his persistence and bravery, for I will need both if I am to prevail in my suit. I wish that I could tell you as much about my father, Thomas Coddington, but I have no recollection of him. He passed away when I was 2 years old. My mother, Mary Howard, was married later that year to Anthony Morris, a wealthy and prominent Quaker citizen of Philadelphia. Before I was born, my stepfather had founded one of the first businesses in the city, Morris Breweries. A taste of his product will immediately convince you as to why the business continues as one of the most highly regarded breweries in Philadelphia. But my story is more than a story of business. It is a story of community respect, built by my family over generations. Civically minded as well as industrious, my stepfather served as the justice of the city's court and was elected mayor in 1738. I was about 7 years old when my beloved mother passed away. Although I had no birth parents to care for me, my stepfather watched over me until Mr. Trent and I were married in 1710. Mr. Trent was a widower in his 40s with 3 grown sons. Though I was just 18 years old, I would now be stepmother to Mr. Trent's 3 adult sons, James, John, and Maurice. An age difference of more than 20 years might seem unusual to some of you, but the difference in our years is considered proper and quite practical. Mr. Trent was a very successful Philadelphia merchant with a warehouse and interest in about 40 ships, doing business in the colonies, England, and the West Indies. He traded goods ranging from New Jersey flour and bread to Jamaican rum and molasses to Madeira from Portugal, all the way to mahogany from Honduras. His ships also brought to the colonies indentured servants and Negroes who were to be enslaved, and he bought and sold these people as well as owning 11 himself. Mr. Trent counted among his associates such esteemed Pennsylvania men as William Penn and James Logan. He owned many properties in and around Philadelphia. It almost goes without saying that my stepfather's care and connections made certain that I would marry a man whose fortune would complement his and provide well for me. During the early years of our marriage, Mr. Trent and I lived in Philadelphia. Our first child was little Thomas, who was born there in 1711, but, alas, did not survive the year. Our second son, William, was born after we moved to New Jersey and is still very young. We worshipped at Christ Church in Philadelphia, which Mr. Trent helped establish, and where he served as vestryman for several years. When I married Mr. Trent, I married into the Church of England, for which I was read out of Quaker meeting. We have attended St. Mary's Church in Burlington since moving here. Because of the present contest for my lawful dower rights, there are some who may wish to call my character into question. By means of this species of skullduggery, they would have you look askance upon my just claims. To combat this, I will mention a story of such perfidy and indecency that delicacy and a strict adherence to my argument might otherwise prevent. 'Twas during our time as parishioners of Christ Church that the strangest of rumors began to fly. Gossip said that Francis Phillips, our reverend, had inappropriate interactions with some of the women in our parish. One of those women was reported to have been me. It was not the first time he had been accused of misconduct, and in January my husband and another parishioner had him arrested. The reverend was dragged from his bed, bare-legged to jail. A mob of boys and men rioted at his imprisonment. They pulled down an entire house and battered people's windows. It was a crisis indeed. In the end, although the governor sided with Reverend Phillips, he was removed as rector of Christ Church and ordered back to England. I will say no more of this matter. As Mrs. William Trent, I was responsible for overseeing the daily household activities and managing the household accounts. My duties included planning the meals that Joan, our cook, prepares, and assigning chores to the boys, Bob and Dick. Nanny is my maid and cares for my son William. Yaff was Mr. Trent's valet and butler, and I still rely upon him to keep the others diligent in their duties. My 2 years in mourning have been uneventful. Such diversions as morning required, and my leisure permits, are unremarkable for a lady of my position in society. Needlework, playing card games, entertaining my friends, going to church. Having fulfilled the duties of my time as a widow, I have recently shed my widow's weeds and may walk in society again, wearing bright frocks and dresses. This one was newly made for me with fabric from England. Yet my reemergence into social circles is tinctured with uncertainty. Mr. Trent died intestate, meaning he did not leave a will. I previously mentioned James, Mr. Trent's eldest son from his first marriage. I am suing James for my dower rights, which by law would be 1/3 of Mr. Trent's estate and holdings. I feel I am owed this, not only for the connections and reputation that came with the Coddington and Morris family names, but also due to my son, Mr. Trent's youngest. I have hired well-respected Philadelphia attorney John Kinsey to sue for my rights. My suit is for 1/3 part of the income from 4 messuages, that is, buildings with associated land, 3 grist mills, 1 sawmill, 1 fulling mill, and several other properties. I am anxious to have the matter settled soon, so that I may have confidence in my financial standing and ensure that my son William will have the start in life that his father's position and wealth should afford him. Wish me well.
Outside of the home, married women of Mary Coddington Trent's time had very few rights, with a husband ultimately in charge of all decisions about the household and owning all property of the family, including any dowry or other property brought into the marriage by his wife. At this time, women could work outside the home with their husband's permission, but they could not vote, own land while married, enter a profession, or attend a university. It was considered unseemly for women of the elite classes, such as Mrs. Trent, to be formally educated, though they may have received some basic education at home. Mary won her court case in 1728. Her stepson James, and subsequently William Morris, her half-brother, had to pay Mary for her share of the estate from 1729 to 1735. She also received profits from the mills and other industries on the property. She sold all rights to most of these properties to George Thomas in 1735. However, Joseph Peace, head miller of the mills on the Assapink, made payments to her until 1750 when he sold the mills to Robert Hooper. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Mary Coddington Trent never remarried, thus retaining control over her property until she died on December 15, 1772, in her 80s. Her death is recorded in the register of St. Michael's Church, and she is most likely buried in the Hopewell Church burying ground on the site of the modern-day Trenton Psychiatric Hospital.